What happened in the court today, what we've seen at the end of this process, is not justice.
An Israeli court rules the state was not at fault for the death of a U.S. activist in 2003. Was the verdict fair and transparent? And how much does this case tell us about the legal system in Israel? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Sika. An Israeli court has ruled that the army was not responsible for the death of U.S. peace activist Rachel Corrie. She was killed in the Gaza Strip by an Israeli army bulldozer in 2003. Corrie was trying to obstruct the demolition of a Palestinian home. Her parents have accused the Israeli military of intentionally and unlawfully killing their daughter. The judge said Corrie was protecting terrorists in a designated combat zone. The family's lawyer has said they will appeal against the ruling to Israel's Supreme Court. In a moment, we'll look at the implications of this. First, here's Cal Perry.
Their daughter was buried almost a decade ago, and since that day, Rachel Corrie's parents have been fighting for somebody to take responsibility for their daughter's death. After more than a 3-year civil case, an Israeli district court ruled what the military had done years earlier. Rachel was in a, quote, war zone, the court ruled, so Israel is not responsible. It was, as the judge stated, a, quote, regrettable accident.
We are, of course, deeply saddened and deeply troubled by what we heard today from Judge Oded Gershon in the Haifa District Court. I believe that this was a bad day, not only for our family, but a bad day for human rights, for humanity, for the rule of law, and also for the country of Israel.
Corrie's parents have spent 10 years, more than $200,000 US, the majority of their savings, pushing for an admission of responsibility. Corrie died on the border between Egypt and Gaza, acting as a human shield. She put herself between a bulldozer and a Palestinian house about to be destroyed. As far as Rachel's mother is concerned, the government of Israel has never carried out a proper investigation. And with the court's most recent decision, she'll have to decide if the family has the strength to continue pushing in court.
We are considering, of course, what the court did today, but our attorney feels very strongly that this should be appealed to the Israeli Supreme Court.
There was no attempt by the family for any financial reparations. This was a very simple and symbolic $1 lawsuit designed to force the Israeli government to admit culpability in the death of an activist. But on Tuesday, a civilian court stood in lockstep with the military, saying that Rachel Corrie never should have been in Gaza to begin with. Cal Perry for Inside Story in Haifa.
Now, attempts to bring legal action against the Israeli military have been going on for years. Here are some cases. In 2005, the Israeli soldier Taysir Haib was convicted of killing a British activist. He was released from prison in 2010, 2 years before completing his sentence of 8 years. Haib was the first Israeli soldier to be sent to jail for killing an activist. Another activist, Tristan Anderson, was shot in the head in 2009 in the West Bank. He and his family have filed a civil suit against the Israeli military for the injury he sustained. However, the trial was postponed due to a last-minute revelation of material evidence. A Turkish court charged 4 senior Israeli military commanders over the killing of 9 Turkish activists trying to reach Gaza in 2010. So, is the verdict fair and transparent? And what does this tell us about how Israel's legal system works? Well, to help us answer these questions, we're joined by our guests. In Haifa, Jafar Farah. He is the director of the Musawa Center, the advocacy center for Arab citizens in Israel. In Beirut, Rami Khouri, editor-at-large for Lebanon's Daily Star and director of the Issam Faris Institute for Public Policy. Rami Khouri is also a professor at the American University of Beirut. And in Jerusalem, we have Efraim Inbar, a professor of political studies at Bar-Ilan University and a former paratrooper in the Israel Defense Force. Good to have you all with us. Rami Khouri, if I could start with you, what does this ruling tell us about Israeli justice? And does it surprise you, considering how Israeli courts have dealt with these cases in the past?
It doesn't tell us very much that's new. For many of us who are critical of the Israeli justice system in its dealings with Palestinians and others under Israeli occupation, it reconfirms a fear that we've held for many, many decades, that Israel can usually claim anything its soldiers or policemen do by saying that this is a military action, it was done at a time of war, special rules apply, security concerns are prevalent, and therefore there is no real verdict against any Israeli soldier or policeman. And this is overwhelmingly upheld by the evidence. Something like 92% of the accusations against Israeli soldiers or policemen in positions of occupying Palestinians over the years have never been indicted, and most investigations are dropped because they claim they can't find evidence. So this is a deeply flawed system. Human Rights Watch, the acclaimed international group, has said that the military investigation system of Israel is deeply flawed, and the courts tend to follow this pattern. You have to look at it in the context of the military character of the Israeli relationship to the Palestinians.
Yeah, we'll talk about the war zone argument a little bit more in just a moment. But Jafar Farah, if I could turn to you and ask you, now that a military and a civilian court have both reached the same conclusion in this case, what does that tell you about the justice system in Israel?
No, we follow up the justice system for the last 11 years, and we see the crisis in the justice system. It's the whole investigation system in the police forces, in the army, and later on in the courts itself. We notice that there is a crisis in values and in the systematic investigation system itself, and later on in the courts. We faced a similar case in killing Arab citizen, Arab civilian at his home, in 2004 with the same judge, and the case, the police officer that killed Arab citizen in 2004 have been found not guilty. So we are not surprised. The situation that 13 Arab citizens already in October 2000 have been shot and killed by police forces during demonstrations, no one have been found guilty, no cases have been submitted against them. It's not a surprise for us. There is a crisis in the legal system in Israel. There is a legislation that have been changed in the last few years against any kind of investigation, and the result was today.
Efraim Inbar, can I assume that you agree with this decision by the Israeli court? And if that's the case, why do you feel that way?
I think it's a clear-cut case, and this is precisely why the colleagues in the show preferred not to talk about the case. It is a lady, and I'm of course sorry about what happened to her. She walked into a war zone. She decided to risk her life in front of a moving bulldozer. It's just jumping. Somebody is jumping in front of a running car. I think
all right. Well,
she was very reckless, and as a result of that, she suffered terrible consequences.
Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this in a bit more.
Let me just add one thing about the Israeli justice system. I think that there are not too many justice systems in the world that are as independent as the Israeli ones. The Israeli justice system is going after presidents, after prime ministers, and anybody that tries to belittle the heroism of this justice system is simply very biased.
All right, let's talk about this a bit more specifically then. There were eyewitnesses there who say, several of them say, that Rachel Corrie was clearly within the line of sight of the bulldozer driver. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that even one of the witnesses, which witnessed that on her part, said that this was not the case. And I think you can clearly establish those things by mathematical computations. I don't know if you know what kind of bulldozer this is. It's a big bulldozer, and the people that are operating it are basically during battle are consumed with attempt to survive, to try to finish their mission, and obviously they couldn't see a small person, which was as close to the bulldozer.
Well, I don't know where you're getting that there was a witness who said this, but there are several witnesses in this case who have said that she was in the line of sight of the bulldozer driver and that he had a clear opportunity to avoid her.
But this is exactly what the judge refuted. The judge clearly made the case, and upon this fact, the verdict was decided that the operator of the bulldozer and his commander couldn't have seen her.
Rami Khouri, I'm sure you want to...
I think it's very tragic, but we should remember what kind of circumstances are.
I'll let you jump in here. Rami Khouri, and I want to ask you as well why you think this case has gotten so much attention. If she wasn't American, would it have been the same?
I think because she was American, it probably got a little more attention. Also because her family, who I met recently in the United States at another event, is an incredibly devoted and a very fine American family that will not stand for impunity in this kind of killing and demands that justice be done. I think the activism of her family has helped a lot. And also, this is a situation which reminds the whole world, virtually the whole world, except for a few diehard supporters of Israel, that this is exactly what the people in apartheid South Africa were saying, that we have a good justice system and we try or put our prime ministers on trial. Of course, the Israelis have a great justice system for Zionists, but when it's dealing with Palestinians or other Arabs or people under their occupation, they reject almost every bit of international law with the very, very minor occasional exception. And the specifics of this case, Rachel Corrie was dressed in a bright orange cover, and there was people all around her waving to the driver. And this was not a war zone. This bulldozer was going to destroy a house of a Palestinian family where Rachel Corrie was living, and she was trying to save that house from being destroyed. This wasn't a bulldozer going to hit a bunch of Palestinians who had guns who were attacking the bulldozer. This was to destroy houses, and 2,500 houses, more or less, were destroyed in Gaza by Israelis and this kind of bulldozer and others in that period in the early 2000s. So this constant, this trying to nitpick these little details of what could the driver see, what could the driver not see. The bigger picture is that the problem is the nature of Zionist occupation, Israeli occupation, subjugation, killing, siege, mass concentration of forces in the Palestinian territories, putting thousands of people in jail, assassinating people, expelling people. That's the context that we have to look at. And if there is a military context, it is that every country is required to abide by the rules of law, international humanitarian law, and to protect civilians and not to run them over with American Caterpillar D9 bulldozers. That's the context we should look at.
Jafar Farah, saw you nodding in agreement there.
No, I can say that there is, today in Israel, there is a different kind of blood and different kind of justice. There is justice for Americans and international, especially if there is Americans. There is justice for Jews in Israel, and there is justice for Palestinians. And, when it comes also to Palestinians, different kind of Palestinians. We lost for, the Palestinian community in Israel, inside the green line of 67, we lost 49 Arab citizens during the last 12 years. Thousands of Palestinians have been killed during the last 12 years in the OPT in 67. When we took the whole 49 cases of people that have been killed, we succeeded only in one case to get a conviction of a police officer that have been involved in killing Arab citizens. The whole system, and I don't talk only about the court system, I talk also about the investigation system, because when there is an accident of killing Arab citizen during, or killing Palestinian during any event, there is an investigation that need to be done before the submission to the court. And all the failure also of the whole investigation system, the result is, the outcome in the end of the day that most cases of killing of Palestinian civilians or even internationals are dismissed even without going to the court. And then when we look at the cases when it comes to Jewish civilians, there is much bigger protection system that will help them even when they are involved in attacks against Palestinian civilians or against international civilians. When settler is involved in killing a Palestinian or involved in killing other Palestinians in the Green Line, or even attacking international peacemaker on the ground, the whole system protect him and try to prevent any legal procedures in the court later on. And when it comes to the court, you know, like just few cases, and this is one of the few cases that it came to the court. And when it comes to the court, we see also how the whole system tried to protect the killers, actually, in the end of the day.
Efraim Inbar, this idea that this is a war zone and we can't help what happens in a war zone, isn't that an argument that basically absolves the Israeli military of any responsibility when they conduct these kinds of operations?
Not at all. I think I was a soldier, a combat soldier, and we have a clear value, purity of arms. And many times Israeli soldiers risk their lives in very difficult circumstances in order not to harm civilians.
Well, clearly
we make telephone calls to civilian populations. It didn't work in this case, right? It doesn't work in every case. You've never been to war. You don't know what characterizes a battle zone. It's very chaotic. It's very easy to speak about war zones in a studio. You should go there and you must survive by split-second decisions. It's not easy to be a combat soldier or to operate a bulldozer and when you are being shot at. So the Israeli army is actually one of the most moral armies in the world. And I want to remind my colleagues in the shows that more Palestinians were killed by Palestinians and by Arabs than by Israelis in the territories. So I think that to accuse Israelis of all wrongdoings, I think it's, of course, maybe is easy to do and tries to make you feel good, but it is very far from the real facts on the ground. We are behaving extremely morally. It is a protracted, very difficult ethnic conflict, and look what happens at other conflicts of this kind. I think Israeli fares very well in this type of conflict.
Jafar Farah, the Israeli army has behaved extremely morally. Your response to that?
Oh, look, you know, people use, you know, this whole explanations. You know, on the ground there is occupation. This is what's happening. You know, this is what we have on the ground. And for the last 4 or 5 years, there is almost no suicide bomb attacks and etc. And still there is occupation. The question, can the Israeli population, the Israeli community really take responsibility over the occupation of the Palestinians? And do they think that they are not responsible to the occupation results? When you send soldiers to occupy civilians, you have to take the international responsibility. I don't think that the Israeli army is moral. I think the occupation is not moral, and it's about time that the Israeli community, the Israeli population, take responsibility on the end of the occupation and the end of civilians tragedies that we face, like Rachel Corrie and like other Palestinians that are killed almost every month on the ground. This is an Israeli responsibility as occupation. There is to be moral, it means to make sure that you follow the international standards, or not only of investigation, but also the international standards of protection of civilians during occupation. And this is not the case.
Rami Khouri, I want to turn back to the fact that, hold on a second, I'll let you respond in a moment, Efraim Inbar, but I just want to turn to Rami Khouri for a moment and ask you again about this, the fact that Rachel Corrie was an American citizen. Is there more the US government, I mean, she was a private citizen, but is there more that the US government could have done in this case or could still do?
You know, there's a lot that the U.S. government can do, and it tends to do that around the world. The exception is usually when Israel is involved. And this is not just about protecting its own civilians. It's about the conduct of American foreign policy. A whole different rule book applies when it comes to anything having to do with Israel for a whole bunch of reasons we don't have time to get into. And that's a choice that the American government makes. That's why almost 95% of the countries of the world are critical of the Israeli occupation and the American one-sided support of Israel. In this case, the American government didn't seem to do very much. There's reports that the American ambassador in Israel said privately to the Corrie family that the military investigation was flawed, was incomplete or something like that. So clearly the United States is not going to push Israel on this issue. And again, we have to talk about the wider context. Mr. Inbar's description of what it's like to be in war is very moving, but quite irrelevant. Very accurate and very moving, but irrelevant to this point. This wasn't a war situation. People were not shooting at that bulldozer. The bulldozer was going to knock down, destroy a Palestinian home. Rachel Corrie was living in that home. There was all kinds of people all around waving flags and waving their arms, and it wasn't a situation where in the heat of battle the bulldozer driver didn't know what was going on. This is a situation where the Israeli military does whatever it wants to do what it feels it must do to protect its civilians, which is perfectly which is what countries do, but in this case it's killing...
Let's put that point back to Efraim Inbar then, the point there that this wasn't a war zone situation, it was one side that was doing all the destruction.
That's simply not true, because this was next to the Philadelphia corridor, which was shot daily. Thousands of shots were shot at the soldiers which were at this corridor, and there was a need to raise houses in order to make it more difficult for the Palestinian terrorists to shoot at Israeli soldiers. This was an operational need, and nobody questioned the Israeli right to defend their soldiers. We are fighting. The problem is that we are facing terrorists who are fighting not only at Israeli soldiers, they are killing indiscriminately Israeli civilians intentionally, not by mistake as we do. And this is the problem. And this is how we have no choice but to defend ourselves. By the way, the issue of occupation, I must say that the responsibility for occupation is primarily Palestinian, because they refuse to make peace, they refuse to recognize the Jewish state, and it's terrible. It's a tragedy that's going to continue until the Palestinian educational system will start teaching about Israeli Jewish rights to this land, about Jerusalem being a Jewish city. And as long as they don't do that, this conflict will continue and many more will die.
Jafar Farah, your response to that?
Well, I can...
Yeah, look, it's a very good way to teach people. Occupy them, you educate them. This is the way, this is the Israeli way to educate people. Occupy them, you educate them. I have to go back also to the point about the US responsibility. I have to go back also to the US responsibility. If you go and follow up the last 10 years of State Department Human Rights report, you see all over the last 10 years that there is a clear criticism of the Israeli government violation of human rights in Israel and the EU OPT. But when it comes to any follow-up, you know, they report about it, but then there is no follow-up. The State Department, the US government don't follow up the Human Rights State Department reports itself. They report about violations of human rights, but then when it comes to Israel, but Israel is not the only case, I have to say. It's political decision of the American administration to make sure that the human rights standards will be the standards all over the world. But when they have Israel in one league, Israel is treated as baby, and then you look at how the US government deal with the Syrian violation of human rights or at the Egyptian violation of human rights.
All right, Rami Khouri, I just want to give the last word to you in the 30 seconds or so that we have left. I mean, are you concerned about the legal precedent that this might set for future incidents like this?
Well, it's not a legal precedent. We've had many cases like this in Israel, but I think the reality is that the more that this kind of decision comes out of Israel, the more that the Israeli military behaves like this, the stronger is going to be the global movement of boycott, divestment, and sanctions, which is the way that apartheid was defeated in South Africa. And there's a growing movement around the world that says this is how we have to deal with the way that Zionism deals with the occupation and suppression of the Palestinians. Inside Israel, Israelis should live peacefully, but in occupation, they should be confronted.
All right,
this is going to happen more and more.
That is going to have to be the last word. I want to thank all three of our guests for taking part in Haifa, Jafar Farah, in Jerusalem, Efraim Inbar, and in Beirut, Rami Khouri. Thanks very much for your time. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. As always, you can send us your feedback, email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks again for watching. Bye for now.